So let's talk about my Roman Empire. Let's talk about a story of getting too lost in your own sauce. It just so happens that, for some reason or another, my brain wanders back to the Now You See Me franchise from time to time. As it stands, the franchise only has 2 movies, Now You See Me and Now You See Me 2. I will come out and say, and I am probably in a minority here, I used to love these movies. And by love, I mean that I watched them hundreds of times in my teen years. They encapsulated something truly magical for me personally. Let us first begin at the genesis of these movies. So the origins of the first film are not as clear-cut. You cannot necessarily trace it back as cleanly as you would with some other properties. It wasn't an adaptation, it was an original property that just cropped up from Lionsgate. There is, however, an article coming from the BBC titled Now You See Me, Magic Makes a Return to the Movies. The article itself basically postulates about how Hollywood was chasing the next big theme within movies that would click with the audiences, and the demand seemed to steer towards magic. So basically it is something we made a movie because the market said so. And the movie was a relative success. On a budget of 75 mil, it earned 351 million. It still boasts a nice 7.2 out of 10 stars score on IMDb, which is pretty good, not great, not terrible. It was enough to guarantee the sequel. Cash grab, which also was a relative financial success. With a budget estimated between 90 and 120 million, it made 334 million worldwide. Slightly less of a success than the first one, but it certainly didn't lose money. This movie, however, only has 6.4 stars on IMDb. It is a noticeable decline from the first in terms of quality, it seems. It was also this movie that began this almost decade-long silence from this franchise. So whatever the hell caused the rise and the fall of Now You See Me? Well, there seems to be either one of the 2 ways you can approach these movies. Either you can watch them as easy breezy, mindless magical flicks, or you can watch them with neurons on full blast. One of them explains the rise, and the other inevitably exposes the fall of the franchise. But what if I told you that only one of them is actually the correct and intended approach? I myself never agreed with people saying that those who are criticizing it are overthinking it. Sure, I did myself actively choose to turn my brain off and enjoy it as much as I could, but nothing about the movie or anything surrounding the movie indicated that this was just a brainless fun type of a flick. So let us overthink a movie that came out more than a decade ago, shall we? So just days or maybe weeks ago, I have no idea when my lazy ass will do this video, Lionsgate released this. And I don't know about you, but I always love when a company who is clearly attempting to make another cash grab tries to use the fans to drum up the hype. Seems very genuine. The design is very human on this one. This is something that the marketing team over at Andrew Reviews HQ, which is me, myself, and I, by the way, would call disingenuous marketing. I mean, usually all marketing is disingenuous, but this one is kinda next level, and it seemingly has worked. The movie managed to buy a headline or 2, but this isn't the first time that these movies have engaged in that. I think I need to deliver some lore to fully understand the sheer stupidity of this franchise. I used to love the first movie, and I was 12 when it came out, and that pretty much tells you everything that you need to know. And while my underdeveloped brains were dazzled by the tricks or whatever, there was something that always pissed me off. This bit of disconnect that irked me. There was always this fascination in me with how these tricks are achieved. And you can't deny, at least part of the appeal of these movies is just the general interest that people have in magic. Magic ain't real, so we are obviously drawn to anything that resembles it. It has a certain draw to it, you can't deny. And then the people behind these movies would proceed to say things like, "In the same way that a magician would distract and keep your eye in control of what we want you to see, we do that in our filmmaking." Chu, the director of the second movie, says, "We're not cheating, we're doing as much as we can practically. We all made a promise to ourselves that that's one thing we are really going to do." Intermission. So I am just, being cutesy and editing, and apparently I forgot to read out a paragraph that is right before the one that I just showed you. So it reads, "Many of the tricks, Kaplan's decapitation early on for instance, were actually done in real time, just as a real-world stage illusion would be. In instances where CGI could be an easy and convincing alternative, Chu and company challenged themselves to make it real." And if you have the free time, I honestly encourage you to go and read the articles from the people who were behind the movie, because they're so funny after you see the movies. It's giving the same energy as saying, "I had a test and I did all of the questions I could and I didn't leave anything blank, and then you failed the test." It's just kind of hilarious to sit there and read all of this and them trying to convince you it's real and practical. Bestie, which part? The mentalism? Like, also, y'all had the same budget as the Divergent series Allegiant, and they made Mars with the budget that they had, so let's not even go there with the all practical, only some CGI stuff. Like, where is the budget going, you know? Anyways, back to the video. And then they would go on to praise the cast members who actually learned some magic. And then the cast members would go on shows. And here is the newly minted national treasure of Poland, Dzień dobry, by the way, so now let's listen to how much Andrew fucked up the pronunciation.
Dzień dobry.
Love that. Jesse Eisenberg saying outlandish shit like this.
Characters perform, we from a stage in Las Vegas rob a bank in Paris, and it seems like this kind of fantastical, impossible thing. But then I was reading the script and you realize, like, oh, it's actually, this thing could actually occur. I loved magic as a kid, but was always frustrated by it because I didn't know how anything was done. And what I love about this movie is actually we explain how we do things. So that trick with the rain is actually not only possible, but in the movie our characters explain to our audience like how it's actually done. And that trick with the rain, in my opinion, is the most beautiful trick in the movie, and yet it's incredibly easy to do.
And I mean...
Then I was reading the script and you realize, like, oh, it's actually, this thing could actually occur. Audience, like how it's actually done. And that trick with the rain, in my opinion, is the most beautiful trick in the movie, and yet it's incredibly easy to do.
So the thing that always seemed awfully weird is that the whole press surrounding the movie naturally focused on the tricks, but the way everyone presented them was always very slippery. While everyone would have a natural question of how much of it is real, you would usually don't get a direct response. Instead, the interviews and press thingies would emphasize the presence of magicians as consultants and the actors taking extensive magical bootcamp training or whatever, or how Dave Franco actually throws cards. So I guess I can dispel this particular trick of theirs and say that most of this is smack, and I won't pretend otherwise, because then why else am I up at 3 AM researching this video and watching a video online called Now You See Me VFX Breakdown by Rodeo Effects 2013? Why else am I reading the VFX Studio article about the very same rain scene that you, Jesse, told us was actually doable? So I feel like we have a very dumb situation on our hands here. We are kind of sort of playing around with plausibility of certain things, and all of that to hide the fact that the entire premise of these movies is just kind of bad and they're kind of full of shit. The common way to deflect any criticism from these movies is that they are not supposed to be taken seriously. Apparently these movies themselves do not want for you to take them seriously, but no, I would disagree with that. How dare you take a movie seriously that had the entire discourse around it shaped by statements saying just how plausible things are? You can come up with as many defenses for this franchise as you may like. You're welcome to do that. I used to do that, but this piece of defense genuinely never added up for me. Because on one hand, you have people saying that this movie isn't that serious or deep, and that you should turn your brain off, and then on the other, you keep hearing about just how much effort into the trickery was put in there. And to me, these two things are not entirely compatible. And there's a lot of media out there saying, guys, look, we have David Copperfield as a producer, so we know our stuff, but don't you dare then assess this movie as anything other than mindless fun, because then you are overthinking it. Oh, and also, I should probably add that I use a lot of like, ooh, CGI buzzword or whatever, but the impracticality of some of the tricks actually doesn't come from the use of CGI. It just comes from them just kind of being disingenuous in the sense that they use a lot of editing and just movie stuff. So it may not be necessarily CGI, but still, they try to say that the tricks are authentic, but then they do everything they can in their power to make them not authentic. Does that make sense? I feel like this type of discourse around the movie inevitably sets up an expectation that a lot of it is real, but when you tune in, you realize that only really small fractions of it are. And this is even before we get to the movies themselves. We are not cheating. You say about a movie that uses buttload of CGI? Well, how about we prove you wrong? So all of us gathered here are most likely aware of that one scene. You know which one. Don't pretend, you know. The one that has 44 million views online. The one that like cancer keeps popping up in various forms across various socials. There is a comment under it on YouTube that says, "The prestige for thick people." And well, it certainly seems like they made that scene assuming that the audiences are idiots. There is also someone down there confessing that they only shat in their seat 5 times upon seeing the scene, so I hope that person feels seen. Comment down below if you shat in your seat 5 times when watching this scene, thank you. So the whole scene focuses on them trying to get the Super Magic Techno card chip thingy, whatever. The card is very clearly shown to be solid plastic, but then, when the time comes to actually smuggle it out, the card begins behaving and moving like a paper card. But then, later down in the movie, the card becomes plastic again. Solid plastic. The thing that always bothered me is that they didn't even need to design the MacGuffin in the way that they did. They could have used any other design that could have made this more feasible, but they did not. The really hilarious thing about how they approach these tricks is that throughout the interviews, they keep calling these people magicians of tomorrow. This is basically them justifying all the nonsense magic and extrapolating on what sort of magic technology could make possible someday. But their approach doesn't come without contradiction. In an article titled "Now You See Me, Harvard-educated magician and puzzle maker on magic as storytelling," we have a nice little interview with David Kwong, an expert who consulted the screenwriters and the director of the film. Kwong provides some nice insights, and the article is overall a nice read. There are a few things in there though that sit a bit awkwardly in there within the context of the movie. All the illusions in the film are based on real practical effects, says Kwong. Even a 3D projection done on the side of a building is now used as a marketing tool. Which is like, I mean, yeah, the projections are being used, but have you seen the projections in the movie?
It is about belief, faith,
purpose, and instead they're used to cheat.
In what universe will that be ever possible? And then they decide to put Isla Fisher's character into a bubble. And you're telling me that they are the magicians of tomorrow. But then there is also the fact that they don't even get some of the most basic things right. There was one trick that happens in the beginning that always bugged me, because it was such an easy trick to explain and pull off, but the movie botches it. Morgan Freeman's character sits down with the law enforcement and proceeds to show a little trick of turning the water red, supposedly into wine or whatever. But I want you to look at this sequence and pay attention to how he grabs the damn glass.
Wow. That's incredible.
Then he reveals that he had a nice little bottle of ink hidden in his palm. But then, that doesn't even make any sense. From the way he grabs the glass, it is not even possible that he poured the ink into the glass. The ink certainly wasn't in the glass beforehand, because the glass was there the entire conversation and diffusion would have worked its magic. Get it? And mixed water and dye. It just makes no sense. And it was such an easy trick to do right. That is what bugged me. They say that things are possible, but they never admit to just how much. But also they straight up make people have magic. You needn't be a Harvard-educated grandmaster in magic to see that there is a potential grain of truth to most of the tricks presented, but they are exaggerated to an extreme extent. Yet this part is never really admitted to out loud. There are passing mentions of exaggeration once or twice, nothing beyond that. Mayhaps to keep up the illusion, and that would be fair. But all of this yapping of mine just reveals a bigger problem that ultimately sinks the two movies. The problem is that all of this is just more evidence that these people approach these movies as, well, magicians. Shocker, I know. But it really becomes a problem when the time comes to sit down and write the whole script. Here is another interesting tidbit from the article, where the article postulates that but the entire movie arc unfolds like a giant magic trick. Setup, drop clues, misdirection, and finally, the surprise payoff. I mean, it was a surprise. This is the ultimate problem. The movies themselves are approached as a magic trick. Here's a wild concept for you. It is entirely possible to view both perspectives of the people who made the movie and the tricks, and the people who felt the movie was cheating them in some way as genuine and correct. It is entirely possible, despite what I just yapped, that the makers of these films, as well as the actors and everyone else, were just excited for the magic and to promote the film. They were obviously proud of their work and the effort they put into it. However funny those statements may appear in hindsight, there is also an argument to be raised that it only adds to the allure of upkeeping the illusion that the movie is more real than it is, because most will be dazzled and they will be convinced that it is more than there is, and that will be enough. But the narrative still sucks, and it sucks more than you think. Therefore, there is a clear disconnect here. These statements allude to this very deep-rooted fixation on making everything magic themed, but it ultimately creates huge blind spots in the script itself. The first movie is what I would like to call a covert flop, because the more you watch it, the more bad it seems, and it really is good for a single watch. So the twist has already been ran through by everyone and their mothers for how bad it is.
You. Why? That is the question, isn't it?
And bad indeed it is. But here I would like to stray from the usual path of just saying that the twist had no build-up towards it. I would argue that it had at least a bit of build-up, but the movie purposefully obstructed information from you, or straight up didn't include stuff to help you connect the dots. Because while reading some opinions online about the movie, there was a very clear sentiment of anger towards the twist, and I think it is a valid feeling, but the things that cause it are just slightly different in my opinion than just twist was bad, movie bad. Yes, I am kind of sort of protecting introducing the twist that almost everyone hates, but bear with me here. Disconnect from the hive mind for a second. Let's look at one of the first encounters between Dylan and Thaddeus Bradley, the dude he is trying to punish in the entire situation the most. First thing that you may notice is that Dylan is kind of very hostile towards Thaddeus. Like, yeah, Thaddeus is crummy, but it does come off as weird that Dylan is just sitting there and staring at him very intently with a vague look of lust or whatever the hell Mark Ruffalo was trying to convey here. And you can also hear that this scene is littered with exposition about a magician named Lionel Shrike, so his apprehension becomes even more visible. Then on the plane, he has a conversation with a French lady named Alma Dre that goes like this.
I could care less about magicians in general. What I hate is people who exploit other people.
Exploit them how?
By taking advantage of their weaknesses, their need to believe in something that's unexplainable in order to make their lives more bearable.
And it does allude to his real motives. Then we have his other interactions with the French lady, where she keeps yapping to him about magic and about Lionel Shrike. He does have weird reactions to it, and the camera sometimes lingers on how he reacts to her. And now, trigger warning, but I am about to compliment the writing of this film. In isolation, and I am underlying, highlighting, emphasizing in isolation, these would be the perfect instances for the movie to practice some form of duplicity. I mean, the movie is about freaking magicians, so it would make sense for the movie to deal with duplicity as a theme. Because all of these interactions listed could go either way. It could mean something deeper about the reveal, or they could also mean something else. The most interesting part that sticks out to me is Dylan's apprehension towards Dre, because it is kinda weird just how apprehensive and hostile he is towards her from the get-go. And during the twist where he literally sits down and proceeds to explain the movie to her, he says that the one thing that he didn't see coming was her.
I planned, I worked out every detail, but the one thing that I couldn't imagine happening was you.
So the film plays her off as a red herring, since he begins suspecting her of being in cahoots with the criminals. So his actions initially could be seen as him not trusting her due to her being potentially the fifth horseman. But after the reveal, they can also be understood as him trying to get rid of her because she is actively interfering with his plans. Then we have Thaddeus Bradley himself, who ironically predicts everything in the movie, but fails to see that everything was being done towards him. What I like is that the movie plants those seeds of what will happen through him. There really is no subtlety in that, but it's not too awful when you watch it as a kid. So what the hell is the issue? The problem is that these instances exist in the wider context of the film, and the movie proceeds to nullify every single thing that I just listed, with all of the other shit that is put in there. Let's start with Thaddeus Bradley. Sure, Dylan is apprehensive towards him, but he is also apprehensive towards the Four Horsemen. He is portrayed as extremely hell-bent on capturing them. So this hatred towards Thaddeus, coupled with his self-admitted general dislike towards people who exploit others, doesn't stand out at all. You may argue that he is acting in front of others to not blow his cover. Valid. But then there is an entire scene where, after a failed chase, Dylan is alone in a bar drinking, because he is allegedly sulking over the failed mission to catch the criminals. Buddy, your plan literally worked. You have no reason to sit with a long face at a New Orleans bar. And there are plenty of other moments where Dylan just acts earnest in his desire to lock these people up, even when he is on his own. But there is an even bigger issue. People keep pointing to the twist and to Dylan as the culprits why the movie's narrative is so bad, and they're correct. But there is another character that is being consistently overlooked and whose writing is the biggest reason why nothing works. That character is Alma Dre. She is the movie's blind spot. Her writing is something that ultimately makes the characters of Dylan and the Four Horsemen the ultimate Mary Sues and Gary Stews. The way this character in particular and the interactions around her are written are the ultimate issue. Let's return to the scene where Dylan is sulking for what we now know is no real reason. We then see that a French lady barges in and he proceeds to blame her. Now maybe he saw her as a useful idiot. She did a dirty and let Atlas go after all. It does incriminate her, and Dylan could use this to seed suspicion towards her over at the government and then potentially pin it all on her. But then we come to another issue. He's after people who are exploiting others, correct? Therefore, he's straight up going against his own philosophy, knowing full well she is innocent, but then throwing out heavy accusations like that towards her. But then the movie plays this little suspicion of his earnestly, because later down the line there is a scene where they squabble, and then afterwards, she just turns to him googly-eyed and asks him to trust her.
What are you doing here?
We're going in the wrong direction and you know it. You need to trust me. Take a leap of faith.
I got her. Go. I got your back. I'll be right here.
and he just allows her to do her thing, even after blocking her the entire time because she could have ruined his plan. There could have been an interesting conflict to be had here. Him trying to eliminate someone who is basically innocent for trying to catch up to him. Meanwhile, he was holding this belief against people who exploit others, but the movie systematically chooses to not take that route. And now I really want you to think about it. Dylan's plan goes perfectly, and I mean completely perfectly. Of course it does, since he is part of the force who is actively trying to hurt his plan. Before the twist, he was a complete idiot. Then afterwards, he was a secret genius all along who executed his plans to perfection. But this genius comes at the cost of the character of Alma. The French lady is really just a love interest for the main guy and a plot device to deliver exposition, and also maybe a suspect. The movie inserts her in this position and it isn't interested in her beyond that. But by the end of that twist, she comes off as really frigging dumb. There is a scene right after Dylan being out at the bar and drinking, where she talks about her job.
You know, when Merritt said I hardly spend any time away from the desk, he was right. I'm a researcher. That's what I do best.
So being a researcher is one of her strengths, correct? So how the hell is it possible that she never stumbled upon the fact that Lionel Shrike had a son? This is a big issue that I personally have with the entire movie. The movie at no point in all of the exposition that characters deliver about Shrike mentions the fact that he had a son or what happened to his family. Nothing. Not even a single passing line. Not the FBI, not Thaddeus Bradley, not Dre have the information that he had a son. And to the audience, of course you wouldn't necessarily connect the dots to this magician guy, because how could you guess that he is the son if there was never even any allusion to his existence? And I believe that Dre never connecting any dots whatsoever through her research is also an offender here. You literally work at an agency that specializes in law enforcement, and your job is to be a researcher, lady. Do your job, do the research. I would have loved to see a scene where, for example, Thaddeus is presented with the information that he left an entire family in ruins after the whole Shrike thing, and just outright dismisses it as if it is of no importance. Would be great foreshadowing, and would also show more of Thaddeus's exploitative nature. Then we also have another issue. In making Dylan perfect, they miss an opportunity for Dre to suspect Dylan himself. It would have been so fire if he slipped up and she figured out his deal and actually somehow foiled his plan. So the thing about magic tricks that this movie kind of fails to convey is that they usually only work in the context of a controlled environment. Usually, the magician has all of their ducks in a row so that he could fool their audience. Sometimes illusion magic tricks only work from a certain point of view. I'm no magician, it is just common sense. You could kinda say that Dylan has all his ducks in his row, as he has the handle over the entire situation. The whole magic trick, the whole shebang is his. But then comes in the French lady. Isn't she the variable that Dylan couldn't predict? You see, this is the problem. The movie is obsessed with creating this trick, this illusion, that only works from one point of view. They control what the audience sees to such an extent that it straight up cheats you. The movie dumps everyone around Dylan down, just so that the illusion wouldn't break, which is just an awful way of storytelling, let me tell ya. Just like some illusion magic trick, they were so hell-bent on putting up a specific facade to create the illusion that it didn't allow for the story to be natural, or to have any real character in it. The narrative is just not natural. It is this weird shell of a movie. And actually kind of poetically, the movie ends up inheriting the inherent flaws in illusion magic. It is important to point out that there are ways that you could have figured out that something was up with Dylan. The movie disproportionately focuses a lot on him, also drops a ton of exposition about Shrike in particular. If you knew even the basic principles of writing, you could just do some deduction and come to that twist yourself. But these are just meta things. They do not exist in the text itself, so we end up with a movie that has a twist, which has build-up, but then the twist makes one character absolutely perfect, another completely dumb. On top of that, the build-up is just straight up obscured by other writing choices, so that the build-up is not build-up at all. And also, the main reveal is never even introduced as a potential explanation, not covertly nor overtly. The movie just doesn't tell you things because it wants the shocking twist at the end. And I think that the anger of the twist really does come from the fact that the movie is just straight up dishonest with you, which is just so arrogant. When you remember that the movie starts with an entire monologue about
Come in close. Closer. Because the more you think you see, easier it'll be to fool you.
Then here comes the second one. Okay, so there are a few things that I like. They do a nice thing with the opening monologue. The words that are said by Thaddeus Bradley.
Are you listening, horseman? When you emerge, I will be there, waiting. Because mark my words, I will be there, waiting.
are repeated right at the end, and they do retain their meaning literally, but they are completely recontextualized. And that is the sort of duplicity that I expected from these movies. Love what they did there. Good job. Other than that, the movie is once again an obvious case of sequelitis. I just really kinda enjoy the fact that the movie immediately begins with a rewrite. It's not very consequential, but it is a rewrite. In the first movie, Dylan describes the day that he lost his father as this.
The morning before the show didn't feel like any other day. When my father said he had to go to work, he could see that I didn't want him to leave.
Immediately, the movie spits on that and makes Dylan present at the site of the trick and also recasts the dad. Anyways, there is an aspect in there that did sort of bring me more enjoyment than the first movie, and that was the fact that the horsemen weren't in complete control anymore and weren't as OP. It's what the first movie severely lacked, so at least there is that. The movie in a lot of ways is just a repeat of the first movie, I feel like. I guess we could begin with a twist of Thaddeus Bradley being in on everything and being part of the Eye, which also just nullifies what I said about liking the characters not being in control and actually being threatened, which is the same as the reveal of Dylan Rhodes being in on everything and being part of the Eye. Purely on vibes, I love this reveal because Morgan Freeman's performance is amazing. But from a narrative standpoint, I hate the hell of this twist. I really like how the first movie, quite nicely so, built up Bradley to be straight up a grifter on other people's misfortunes and careers and got his comeuppance. I liked him as a grifter, but this movie undoes everything because he was actually a good guy, and not only that, he was buddies with Dylan's dad. And his explanation for not revealing himself sooner to Dylan?
I put you in jail, man. Why didn't you say something then?
Well, you know, I was going to. But then you were so quick to show your personal motivation. Well, quite frankly,
I showed my weakness.
well, it showed you weren't ready. And I knew it was my job to see to it that he became the magician he was born to be. All that was left then was
For me to hit bottom.
And I hate this explanation. It is dumb. This is pure movie logic. It isn't realistic. Even if Bradley never wanted to reveal this info to Dylan for the sake of him becoming a great magician, it has been 30 years, and I feel like it's sometimes hard to conceptualize years when movies throw them at you. 30 years is an extremely long time. Insanely long time. It is nearly impossible that, during those 30 years, Dylan never got even a slight hint about Thaddeus Bradley that he is in the Eye. If Thaddeus was buddies with Lionel, it is hard to think that there was not even a shred of a throwaway sentence from Lionel around Dylan. Not a photo, not even a small trail that could suggest who Thaddeus was. In addition to that, Dylan was literally obsessed with this man, and in all of his research, which he presumably did, never ever did he uncover anything, not a single connection, nada, for 30 years. It was sort of realistic for Thaddeus to not see it coming the first time around, since he was shown to not give a shit about the lives that he ruins. That was in character. It is not realistic, however, for this obsessed dude to not figure anything out at all. Then the villain. The movie does a thing where it makes this villain to be related to the last movie's villain. Yeah, the son of the British guy is the main baddie. Wow, how amazing, lovely. Let's... Hooray! I mean, the acting is great on both of them, but really? Then they introduce Lula, who is just super horny for Jack and manages to talk about him in like every other scene. The tricks are absolutely ridiculous this time around, and the movie is much less grounded in general. I mean, not that the first movie was very grounded, but this film is very whack. So now we may return to the present day. It is probably kinda weird to see this video titled The Rise and the Fall of this franchise when they have already announced the sequel. As per Variety, it will focus on a diamond heist that involves two generations of illusionists. The horsemen seemingly come out of retirement and join newcomers to take down dangerous criminals. Oh, and they also said that they are working on the fourth movie before the third one is even out. And where did we hear that song before? They said the exact same thing before the second one came out. They told us they were working on the third, and we ended up waiting almost a decade for it. They also did the cursed move of announcing a potential spin-off for the second film, because everything needs a spin-off and a universe these days, and as if the sequel wasn't already an indicator that this franchise was just a cheap cash grab. So what does that tell us about the future of this franchise? Well, it is so far up in the air, but I have to be honest that my imaginings are not skewed towards the positive. The sad truth is that yes, while the movie concept is inherently not suited for a heist since magic is not nearly as cool, you could forgive the movies for embellishing things. If only they made the story better and didn't actively pretend that any of it is plausible, and there absolutely was a way to make it better. Some things things were just easy fixes that the film kinda insisted on not fixing, because it was stuck on tricking the audience instead of respecting it. The two movies are pretty deep into being quite arrogant in their approach. They do not view the audience on equal footing, but rather as someone to be fooled. So no, I am not beaming with excitement for the next movies, because if that is the same mentality that they will be using over there, then the movie will most likely suck. And on that note, we shall conclude the story of the rise and the fall of Now You See Me franchise.